Welcome back to Fun with Statistics. So I wanted to do a quick video just to explain the relationship of the sampling distribution, which I've displayed here, with the decisions that we can make with the null hypotheses. So as you might recognize by now, hopefully after completing the first 3 units, is that the sampling distribution here, and I've labeled 2 critical regions, and these critical regions are chosen. The most common when using a z-test, which you've just completed, is the 1.96, which you'll recognize is associated with an alpha of 0.05. So when using an alpha of 0.05 with a z-test, we would have the critical region set with a critical value of 1.96. That means is that 0.025% of the sampling distribution is on this end and 0.025 is on this end. So combined we have 5% of the distribution. So what does that actually really mean? So the sampling distribution, what's key to remember is that these are all possible means that we would get of a sample of a particular size if our null hypothesis were true. So if our independent variable had 0 impact, had no impact, or we didn't even have an independent variable, this is the random samples and the probability of getting a random sample of a particular size given the null hypothesis is true. And that given the null hypothesis is true is the most important part. Because when we land in this critical region, say I do a z-test and I have an obtained z value of 2.3. So I fall in here at 2.3, negative 2.3. So what does that mean in terms of our null hypothesis? So what it means is that given our sample size and the mean that we obtained, there is a low probability, I'll put it that way, there's a low probability or less than a 5% chance that that mean is simply due to chance alone. So what's left is, if we're looking at our null hypothesis, so our null is that there's no effect, or that our means are actually equal in the population. That's not likely true. And so we would make the decision to reject the null hypothesis. So why am I not saying that I'll accept the null hypothesis? Or the more even common wording is that our independent variable likely had an impact. That's not the actual decision you're making, it's about the independent variable. The sampling distribution is simply about the probability that the null hypothesis is true. Or the probability that we would obtain that mean given chance alone. So these are highly probable means that you would get given chance alone, and these ones are less probable. But they're still possible. So that's why when we're going to make a decision about the null hypothesis, I want you to either reject the null hypothesis or fail to reject the null hypothesis. The decision itself is always about the null hypothesis, and I've given some explanation to that in Unit 3. So just to be clear and reiterate one more time, that the sampling distribution is all a distribution of means that are possible when the null hypothesis is true, and the likelihood that we would expect to draw it. So when we have a low likelihood, it's like when you're gambling, it's the odds. So there's a higher probability that it's not due to chance alone, which, the only thing left is that it's due to the impact of your independent variable. But this is not testing the impact of the independent variable, if that makes sense. It's only testing the probability that you would get that random sample due to chance alone. So if there's a low likelihood that that's the case, you'll reject your null hypothesis, and then as a researcher you would go, you know what, it probably was my independent variable instead. So you're willing to bet that your independent variable had the impact on the mean, and that's why you fell in the critical region. But there's still a 5% chance when you've rejected the null hypothesis that it was just chance alone, and that's when you've rejected under that scenario. It's a type 1 error, as you'll recall. So again, unlikely that it's chance alone, but still possibility. And that's why statisticians speak like, politicians maybe. It's likely that. So we're not concrete about everything because it's basically calculating the odds. Hope that helps clarify, and if not, post a question to the discussion board and we can continue on the discussion. Thank you.